The ranch should never have existed. 120 acres of grazing land, a 2-story cedar house, a working well, and miles of fencing had been sold for less money than a saddle horse.
I didn't expect to find
As Ethan Mercer guided his wagon through the open gate
I'm
beneath
not
the
running
burning
anymore,
western
Ethan.
sun, he felt as if he had stepped into someone else's dream. The fields stretched endlessly toward distant hills, and the house stood alone against the sky, like a forgotten memory waiting to be remembered. The seller, Gideon Price, had shaken his hand that morning and promised him one thing above all others. The place is empty. Yet 3 hours later, standing in the silent hallway with dust floating through golden sunlight, Ethan heard footsteps above him. Slow footsteps. Careful footsteps. The kind made by someone who did not want to be discovered. His hand instinctively moved toward the revolver at his belt as he stared toward the staircase. A young woman appeared at the top step. She wore a faded riding dress and old leather boots, and her dark hair rested loosely over her shoulders. Strangely, she showed no fear. She simply looked down at him with tired eyes that carried the weight of too many winters. "You must be the new owner," she said quietly. "My name is Clara Hayes. I've been looking after this place." Ethan frowned in disbelief. "Looking after it for who?" Clara slowly descended the stairs. "For the ranch itself, I suppose." She touched the worn wooden railing as if greeting an old friend. 3 years ago, I arrived here with nowhere left to go. The roof leaked, the fences were broken, and the well was nearly dry. I repaired what I could and survived the rest. Ethan studied her carefully. There was honesty in her face and exhaustion in her voice. "The seller never mentioned anyone living here." Clara gave a faint smile that held no humor. "Mr. Price knows only what he wants to know." She walked toward the front window and stared across the fields. Some stories are buried deeper than ownership papers. Ethan had spent 6 years saving money after losing his wife to illness. This ranch was supposed to be a new beginning, a quiet place where memories could finally stop hurting. Instead, he had walked into someone else's unfinished battle. "Why was it sold so cheaply?" he asked. Clara remained silent for several moments before answering. "Because the men searching for me know this place exists." Ethan felt the room suddenly grow colder despite the afternoon heat. "Who is searching for you?" Clara clasped her hands tightly together. "Men who stole my father's silver mine after his death. Men who forged documents and called it business." She knelt beside the fireplace and lifted a loose floorboard. From beneath it, she removed a leather packet wrapped carefully in cloth. Inside were maps, deeds, and handwritten surveys covered with notes. "These are the original ownership records," she said softly. "Proof that the mine belongs to my family. Proof that powerful men built their fortune on lies." Before Ethan could answer, the distant sound of horses echoed across the valley. Clara rushed toward the window. 3 riders approached along the southern trail, moving with deliberate confidence. Even from a distance, they looked dangerous. "They're here," Clara whispered. "The Blackwell brothers finally found me." Ethan watched the riders spread apart as they neared the house, cutting off escape routes with practiced ease. Their leader dismounted and adjusted the brim of his black hat before slowly walking toward the porch. "That is Cole Draven," Clara said quietly. "He does their dirty work." Ethan glanced toward the back door. "You can leave through the creek path." Clara shook her head. "I've spent 3 years running. There is nowhere left to go." The knock came moments later, heavy enough to shake the doorframe. Ethan stepped outside onto the porch. Cole Draven stood below with 2 armed riders behind him. "Afternoon," Cole said with a cold smile. "We're looking for a young woman traveling under the name Clara Hayes." Ethan crossed his arms. "No one here by that name." Cole's smile widened. "Funny thing about lies. They usually sound nervous." Ethan refused to move. "This is private property." "Property changes ownership," Cole replied calmly, "but debts remain. Behind Ethan, the front door opened softly, and Clara stepped onto the porch beside him. She wore riding clothes now and carried a small satchel across her shoulder. "Leave him out of this," she said firmly. "You want me? Then speak to me." Cole's expression relaxed like a hunter finally spotting his prey. "There you are." Clara lifted her chin. "The documents stay with me." Cole's eyes narrowed immediately. "Then you admit you have them?" Before she could answer, another sound rolled across the valley. More horses. Faster horses. Everyone turned toward the eastern hills where 4 riders emerged through clouds of dust. They rode hard and without hesitation. Cole's confidence vanished instantly. "Who are they?" one of his men asked nervously. The answer came moments later as the lead rider raised his badge toward the sunlight. Marshal Thomas Reed and his deputies thundered toward the ranch. Cole drew his revolver and grabbed Ethan by the collar, pressing the barrel against his head. "Nobody move," he shouted. Clara's face turned pale as the riders closed in around the property. The peaceful ranch Ethan had bought for almost nothing had become the center of a war he never wanted. Yet standing beside Clara beneath the western sky, he realized there were some fights a man could not walk away from. To discover what happens next in this journey of secrets, justice, and unexpected love, stay with Wild West Tales stories and ride with us into... Marshal Reed pulled his horse to a stop near the porch, his deputies spreading out across the yard, with rifles ready. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the ranch as silence settled between both sides. Cole Draven's revolver remained pressed against Ethan's temple, while Clara stood frozen beside him. "Release him," Marshal Reed ordered calmly. "This ends here." Cole laughed bitterly. "Ends? You rode a long way for a piece of paper, Marshal." Reed's expression never changed. "I rode here because 3 innocent men disappeared after asking questions about the Blackwell mine." Clara looked toward the marshal with surprise. Reed nodded slightly. "Your father's letters reached my office 6 months after his death. He knew something would happen to him and left instructions if the mine was ever stolen." For the first time in years, hope flickered in Clara's eyes. Cole noticed it too. His grip tightened. "Hope can be dangerous," he muttered. Suddenly one of his riders shifted nervously in the saddle, and in that single distracted moment Ethan acted. Years of carpentry work had given him strong shoulders and quick reflexes. He drove his elbow backward into Cole's ribs and threw himself sideways as the gun fired harmlessly into the dirt. Deputies rushed forward instantly. Within seconds, the yard exploded into chaos. Horses reared, men shouted, and gunfire echoed against the hills. Clara pulled Ethan behind a water trough as bullets struck the wooden fence nearby. "You should have run when you had the chance," she said breathlessly. Ethan shook his head. "I've spent too many years running from memories already." Their eyes met for a brief moment before another shot shattered the silence. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. Outnumbered and surrounded, Cole's men finally surrendered. Marshal Reed personally placed iron cuffs around Cole Draven's wrists. "The Blackwell brothers won't save you this time," the marshal said. As the prisoners were loaded onto wagons, Clara handed the leather packet to Reed. The marshal examined the documents carefully before smiling for the first time that day. "These records are genuine," he announced. "The Hayes claim belongs to your family exactly as your father said." Clara closed her eyes in relief as years of fear finally began to lift from her shoulders. Evening settled quietly over the ranch after the lawmen departed. Ethan repaired the damaged porch while Clara sat nearby watching the sunset paint the hills gold and crimson. "I suppose this means I'll finally leave," she said softly. Ethan looked up from his hammer. "Why?" She seemed surprised by the question. "Because this is your ranch." Ethan smiled faintly. "Seems to me this place belonged to you long before I arrived." Clara laughed for the first time since he had met her. It was a small laugh, but it carried warmth back into the empty house. Days turned into weeks. Together they repaired fences, cleaned fields, and brought life back to the forgotten ranch. Ethan discovered Clara knew more about 3-4 cattle than most ranchers he had ever met. While Clara learned that Ethan's quiet nature hid a stubborn kindness she had almost forgotten existed in the world. One evening they stood near the pasture watching stars appear above the mountains. "Do you ever regret buying this place?" Clara asked. Ethan considered the question carefully. He remembered the danger, the threats, and the chaos that had followed him through the front door on the very first day. Then he looked at the woman standing beside him beneath the western sky. "Best dollar I ever spent," he answered. Clara smiled and looked away toward the horizon. Spring arrived with green grass and newborn calves. News spread quickly across the territory about the fall of the Blackwell operation and the reopening of the Hayes silver claim under lawful ownership. Clara received offers to sell the mine for fortunes larger than she had ever imagined, but she refused every one of them. "Gold and silver come and go," she told Ethan one morning. "Some things are worth more." Months later, as the sun rose over the ranch that almost nobody wanted, Ethan stood beside Clara on the porch where their story had begun. The old house no longer looked forgotten. Smoke rose from the chimney, horses grazed peacefully in the fields, and laughter replaced silence within its walls. Sometimes the greatest treasures are not hidden in mountains or buried beneath the earth. Sometimes they are waiting behind old doors in places the world has abandoned. And sometimes a man buys a ranch for almost nothing, only to discover he has found everything he was missing. If you enjoyed this journey through the Wild West, filled with courage, mystery, and love, don't forget to follow Wild West Tales stories and saddle up for more unforgettable adventures from the frontier.